But I think for some people, Vince, it's not so much that they're looking to God for value, but actually they say, well, I find my value in the relationships that I have with other people. And so I really appreciate this question that's come in from a high school student who says, what if my happiness relies not on God, but on another human?
Well, first, I just want to say I'm glad you're happy. I think that's a great thing, and I think that's a gift from God. I think that's a gift from God. That's fantastic. I'd also want to say with C.S. Lewis that if happiness were all we were after, then as he said, a good bottle of port would do the trick. His point was, if happiness is a good thing in life, maybe it's not the only good thing. And I wonder if implicit in your question is something of this assumption that happiness is the ultimate goal. 51% of Generation Z say that that happiness is our ultimate goal in life. And I'd want to question that. 1974, a philosopher named Robert Nozick, he put a thought experiment forward. He called it the experience machine. And the idea was that you could plug into this machine and it would give you an exact similarity, an exact sameness, the exact mental states of any experience that you wanted to have. So you wanted the experience of winning the Olympics, you could have that. You wanted the experience of being as good looking as Abdu, you could have that. You could have exactly the experiences that you want. And then he asked a question of people. He said, would you plug into the machine? And it's an interesting question. He said that we shouldn't plug into the machine. He said, because I don't just want to feel as if I'm loved, I actually want to be loved. I don't just want to feel like I've made a difference. I want to actually make a difference. These things are important. And he said, no, I don't think we should plug into the experience machine. He said there's more to life than just those feelings of happiness that we desire. We want them to be grounded in reality. And I remember listening to a radio program. I wasn't even listening to it to listen to Ravi, but I happened to be listening to the radio and Ravi came on and he was being interviewed. And the interviewer asked him the question, do you enjoy your ministry? And we've been up front with Ravi so many times, and it's hard to find a version of a question that he hasn't heard and that he doesn't know something significant of how he wants to respond. I've never seen him actually sit back and pause for the length of time that he did before he responded to that question. And when he finally responded, he said, there have been many moments of deep joy. And what I realized was that he had never thought about his ministry or his life in that framework, in those terms. He had never primarily thought to himself, is this what makes me happiest? Is this what is most enjoyable? Is this what is most pleasurable? He asked also deeper questions about calling and character and service and love and about the way that he wanted to treat people and about the purpose and the meaning that God had in his life. And I think that's very significant. So I would ask you to think deeply about this question of whether happiness is the most significant thing in life. One thing I would say is that if that's what you believe, that's a very exclusive worldview. It's a very exclusive philosophy. Maybe there are a few people in the world who can make things work for a time with that philosophy, but the reality is there's a lot of people in the world who are not happy. And even the people who are happy right now, there's going to come a time when suffering comes, when a pandemic comes, when death comes. All of us are going to face that time when we're not happy. That is a very exclusive philosophy, and I personally want my worldview to be much more inclusive than that. I am attracted to the worldview of Christianity because it is based on the unconditional love of God for every single person and an invitation to every single person in the world to step into an intimate relationship with Him. I don't want an exclusive philosophy based on happiness that only some have the privilege of seeking after. I want a totally inclusive philosophy. And the other thing I would say, just as I finish on this question, is I'm so glad that happiness was not the fundamental thing that God was after, because He was perfectly happy the way He was. Before the creation of the universe, He was in the perfect fellowship, the perfect relationship, the perfect pleasure of that perfect relationship between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. He was there in the Trinity. There was no brokenness. There was no frustrated relationships. There was no tension. He had perfect happiness. And if that was all He was after, He never would have created this universe beautifully like Abdu spoke about. He never would have created me. He never would have invited me into the relationship with him that changed my life. So I'm so glad that that's not ultimately what Jesus was after. And, the last part of your question, you said that your happiness relies not on God, but on another human. There's part of me that wants to say good instinct there. That happiness maybe in some form does need to rely on another human. Why? Well, because God is infinite, he's transcendent, he's so distant from us. Sometimes we feel that need to rely on a human, someone who can relate to what we've been through, someone who understands what we've been through, someone who we can sit and eat with across the table. I think perhaps there's a good intuition there in your question and a good instinct. And I would say that for me, that points, though, not to a finite human, not to a fallible human, not to a human that's going to let you down, not to a human that ultimately is going to suffer and die, but to a human who is perfect, to a person who is fully human and fully God, who can completely relate to you, and one day we will literally sit across the table with him and eat, and yet is fully divine and so can satisfy our deepest desires. I think there's a good intuition in your question, and I would pursue it where it leads.
Mm-hmm.